Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm so happy to see you all. And I'm very delighted to be here today with Dinty Moore, editor and founder of Brevity magazine. Welcome, Dinty.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we have a lot of people tuning in today. As always, any questions, just go ahead and type them into the chat and I will work them into the conversation. So Dinty, let's jump right in. Do you want to tell us about the history of the magazine? And if I'm not mistaken, you are the founder. So when did you create the magazine and why?
We've been around for since 1997, so that's about 27 years, which is a long time for any magazine, but certainly a long time for an online magazine. If you were alive in 1997, the internet was still a very new thing. The what we called the World Wide Web back then
Right, right.
was a very, very new thing. I honestly kind of started the magazine because I wanted to learn how to make web pages.
Hmm.
Because this was such a new thing, and I taught myself HTML, and at a very early site was very crude. And I was interested. So why did I start the magazine? Actually, it was just playing around on the internet to see if does this thing work?
Uh-huh.
Is there any future in it? Why did I start a magazine of very, very brief nonfiction prose? Had to do with, my literary interests. Flash fiction was quite
Hmm.
popular in the 1980s and 1990s. Lots of magazines and anthologies were focusing on flash fiction, different lengths, 300 to 1,000 to 1,200 words. Flash nonfiction, though Judith Kitchen had played with it in her anthologies, but she had a 2,000 word upper limit. And I love Judith Kitchen and I love her anthologies. I'm not by any means throwing any shade her way. What she did was amazing, but she was letting people have 2,000 words, and she was open to excerpts from longer work that just read beautifully. I wanted to see if we could do in nonfiction
Hmm.
what the amazing experiments people were doing in flash fiction at the time. So I said, okay, we'll make it short nonfiction. And I picked 750 because it just seemed like maybe enough, but also a pretty big challenge. Um, what else do I want to say about the founding of it? It was always just a personal project. It's never been uh, funded or fully associated with any other organization. For a while, when I was teaching in Ohio, some of the graduate students helped, but it's a volunteer organization, and it's grown. Well, I
Hmm.
guess we'll talk about that. I've never
Sure.
imagined it would grow to the length that it has.
Uh-huh. And so were there no flash nonfiction magazines at that time?
There were no flash nonfiction magazines at that
Mhm.
time. There were no print magazines that I know of that were soliciting
Mm.
flash or very brief nonfiction. Not that it might have not shown. Well, prose poetry was around.
Mhm.
And there's a really fine line between prose poetry and short
Sure.
nonfiction. Um, so no, we were certainly the first magazine to exclusively publish flash nonfiction. No
Interesting.
longer are we the only one.
Did you find that in the beginning people didn't quite know what it was, or maybe even now
That was part
that
of. I'm
people
going to
don't
be
know?
honest with you. That was part of my plan
Uh-huh.
because I wasn't. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't deeply committed to the magazine. I was deeply committed to figuring out what is this. And there was a magazine called Blackbird that
Mhm.
was a literary magazine online. I believe they're the first and we're the second, though
Mhm.
it's hard to tell for sure
Mhm.
if there was another one around, but certainly the ones that have survived and thrived. It was Blackbird out of one of the Virginia universities and Brevity. I wanted to see what this internet thing was and could it work? Would it ever be useful as a place to publish people's work?
Right.
I chose flash nonfiction partly for the reasons I've told you already. It's a
Mhm.
fascinating form.
Mhm.
Um, Not much was being done with it. I wondered what could be done with it. I knew
Mhm.
flash fiction was working really in exciting ways, so why not nonfiction? But I also thought, hey, I'll make it a magazine of only flash nonfiction. What am I going to get? 4 or 5 submissions a month? This will be easy. Nobody's
Right.
writing this stuff. I'm not going to get it. I was wise enough to know that, you start a magazine and you go, wow,
Mm.
I can't wait to read that stuff. And 3 years later, it's like, wow, it's so
It
much
would help.
work.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, well, it's never going to really be anything but a little tiny anomaly on the side of the literary world.
Uh-huh, sure. So just to cover the basics for a moment, can you tell us what the journal publishes? So now you mentioned that the magazine has grown. So now you have flash nonfiction under 750 words. And real quick, if everybody could just take a moment to mute themselves, that would be great. Thank you. So flash nonfiction under 750 words, but you also have craft essays, you have a blog. Can you tell us about the different
We
features?
we we for many years published just nonfiction, and then we decided to publish craft essays. Those are still available on the site. Um, some amazing craft essays over the years. We published book reviews for many, many, many years. I'll get to that in a minute. Um, and then we started 16 years ago. I've lost track, but we started a while back, but not as far back as the magazine. We started the something called the Brevity blog,
Mhm.
a different site, a different URL. I can put those in the chat at some point if Becky hasn't already. Um, and that Brevity blog has grown so large and so popular
Mm.
that it's become the home for our craft essays. In addition to so Brevity now, the magazine is
Mm.
just brief nonfiction. We publish nothing else but these brief essays, though we keep um, the backlog, the catalog of craft essays available. Um, Brevity blog publishes both craft essays and just personal essays on the writing life, essays discussing the frustrations and joys of editing and publishing, uh, really anything, humorous essays, anything related to writing, editing, publishing, going to school for writing, craft,
Mm.
ends up now on the Brevity blog. That is published 5 days a week. Sometimes we fall down between Christmas and New Year's, but basically that comes out 5 days a week,
Mm.
one piece a day.
Mhm. So what is the difference between the blog? Because I see on the site there's a link for the blog and the craft essays. Is that the same?
We're no longer accepting craft essays.
I see.
The
Okay.
link for craft essays allows you to go into our still very extensive and still very useful backlog.
Hmm.
Um, but if the craft essays we are accepting now, and this has been the case for about 2 years, the craft essays we are accepting now go directly to the blog.
I see. Okay. Great. We have a question here, which is pretty interesting. Do you ever need to use fact checkers?
I hear a dog.
Yeah, just a reminder, please mute yourself, listeners. Thank you very much.
Um, we couldn't afford fact checkers.
Uh-huh.
We survive just barely on the little bit of money that Submittable throws back at us.
Mm.
We're lucky in the sense that we're a big magazine, so we get a fair number of submissions. So
Mm.
we can pay our website fees. We can pay our all the different website fees you have to pay to make sure you aren't hacked and spammed and destroyed by the dark web. We don't pay our editors. We don't pay me.
Mm.
So no, have we ever used a fact checker? Every once in a while, I've gone and said, wait a minute, I better look to see if this is making sense. And I'll like double check the events that are mentioned if possible.
Mhm.
Once in a while, I'll have a conversation with the author, which is really awkward. Um, but it's happened. But
Right.
basically, no. Basically, we survive on the goodwill and trust
Mhm.
that goes between writers and editors. And we haven't, I bet you we've published a piece or two that was not meeting my definition of nonfiction. I
Mhm.
don't know which ones those were.
Mhm.
The world didn't crumble because of it.
Yeah.
I like nonfiction to be true. I can answer a
Mhm.
question later about all the caveats about what is
Right,
truth
right.
and what is memory. I like
Mhm.
nonfiction to be true. I
Mhm.
think fiction is a wonderful form, but a different form.
Absolutely.
Um, but 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 I can't,
Mhm.
you know. hire
Sure.
private detectives to prove that
Uh,
everything submitted is as accurate as possible.
sure, sure. So relatedly, can you take us through your editorial process? About how many submissions do you get per period, and how are those submissions evaluated?
We get about 400 submissions a month.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big, which comes out to about 2,800 to 3,000 a year, actually, because the first month and the last month are so big. We might get 800, not 400 on the first month and the last month. So I'm sorry, we take work from September to April. So September, because people have been sitting on their work all summer, we tend to get a big batch of submissions.
Mm.
And then in April, when we announce, hey, we're going to be shutting down in a few weeks, we tend to get a big batch of submissions. So really, when I do the math, we do 3 issues a year. We put 12 to 15 essays in each issue, and we get about 1,000 submissions for each issue. So we're taking 1,000 submissions and choosing 15. It's very hard. Um, I'll get to the process in a minute because I know you asked me that, Becky, but I will say we have to turn down a lot of good work.
Mm.
Um, I could publish this magazine every 2 weeks if I didn't have a life and another job and a family and a need to sleep. It's not a lack of good work that makes us
What
come
are you
out.
doing sleeping?
It's it's
It's not
it's it's
allowed.
it's what we are able to do a
Yeah,
quality job. Um, so we do turn down a lot of good work. And I'm
sure.
probably get a question about that soon too.
Mm.
So I'll hold my definition of good work versus great work for a moment. People submit through Submittable. We have a team of assistant editors. I see at least one of them here on the call. Hi, Lindsay.
Mhm.
I can't read the. If there's another one there, I can't see you, but I don't mean to not say hello. But I can see Lindsay, so hi. We have a team of assistant editors, volunteers. Some of them are graduate students at Fairfield University. Some of them are just readers of the magazine over the years who've said, I really like what you're doing and get your aesthetic. Could I be one of your volunteer editors? When pieces come in, eventually our managing editors will divide them into smaller groups and send the pieces out in a batch of 10 a week to a small group of 2 or 3 assistant editors. Those 2 or 3 assistant editors read it over and give um, an opinion as to whether it's yes, no, or maybe. Sometimes they will offer commentary on why they think it's a yes or no or maybe. If the pieces are getting some traction, 1 or 2 or 3 of the editors feel pretty strong about it, then more eyeballs are applied and a few more people look at it. And eventually, if there's a healthy discussion, it doesn't have to be all positive. If there's a healthy discussion about is this piece ready for brevity or not, if there's a few people who feel really strongly positive about it, even though some people are like, not for me, eventually it gets kicked up and the managing editors look at it and I look at it. And that's where the final decisions are made. Um, we sometimes give editorial feedback. We try, but it's really hard with the level of submissions we have. So, um, essentially, we we read everything. We read everything closely. More than one of us reads it, and we send no. I don't like the term rejection. We send a no thank you, not this time
Mhm.
letter via
Mhm.
submittable if we don't accept a piece. If we do accept a piece, there's a little bit of light editing.
Mhm.
If it needs a whole lot of editing, that's another problem with the fact that I need to sleep and other people on the staff need to sleep, and we have jobs and schools and lives. So if it needs a lot of editing, we're going
Mhm.
to say no, thank you.
Mhm. Is there a kind of brevity identity? Do you ever encounter works that you really like, but that you feel like are not right for brevity? Or do you just try to publish like a wide array of?
I try my best. I mean, the brevity identity in the early days, because this is where creative nonfiction was at.
Mhm.
Um, Thanks a lot to the work of Lee Goodkind, who got the genre established under that name and gave it an identity within the literary magazine world. The early pieces were very scene based, very
Mhm.
much like a work of short fiction.
Mhm.
There's two characters, they're in a place, there's some dialogue, something happens, there's a resolution. Um, Over the years, to an extent I never imagined, and it still excites me and wows me.
Mhm.
I've seen how much more writers can do
Mhm.
beyond that. I used to say, oh, if you're going to write a piece of flash nonfiction, keep it to like 20 minutes,
Mhm.
over the weekend when you were at the family cabin, or, 20 minutes in high school, where
Right.
those 20 minutes represent everything about your horrible high school experience.
Uh-huh.
That's still not bad advice, but I've seen people cover 10, 20, 30 years in
Mhm.
700 words. We are publishing lyric essays, very lyric essays, language-based essays. We are publishing lots of other kind of experimental uh, essays. We've got an essay in the most recent issue, that is mostly in Spanish, and we don't bother to translate it. And it's about language, and I think you can follow it, and I think it's beautiful the way it is.
Mhm.
Um, Very short essays, very voicey essays.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of ways to do it now. And my favorite issue, or my goal for each issue, 15 essays, is that we represent a spectrum. There's some traditional, whatever that means, flash essays that sort of read like an interesting scene in the person's, life memoir.
Mhm.
There's lyric essays, very languagey essays. Maybe there's a hermit crab or two. There's some humor. There's something wildly experimental. There's something that's very voice based.
Mhm.
For me, the perfect issue has all of that.
Mhm.
So no, I mean, other than diversity, and
Mhm.
we've worked really hard over the last 15 years or so to get diversity and of all sorts. Obviously, diversity of race and diversity of ethnicity. We now have a very international audience, and we're publishing more and more international authors. I also mean diversity of experience. It was very important to me to get working class and struggling. A class is important to me because of my background, so I wanted to make sure we weren't only publishing. Nothing wrong with being a privileged student who got an MFA at a nice school, but I want to make sure we weren't only publishing privileged white students who got an MFA at a nice school. We worked really hard to get to, and of course, diversity of experience includes disability, includes um, I don't know, single mothers, single
Mhm.
moms, single grandmoms, um, everything.
Mhm.
I just want to reflect as much of the life experience as possible,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
just, there used to be a dig at literary magazines that was partially earned. All of the poems were written by college professors about how hard it was to be
Right.
a college professor and a poet. And it's fun to make fun of that. And sometimes I've read magazines that go, yeah, it's true. We don't want to be that magazine.
Right, right. So let's jump into the craft a little bit. Tell us, in your opinion, if you can pin it down a little bit, what makes a really great work of flash nonfiction? What are you looking for?
First and foremost, I managed to both talk and drop the URLs in the chat for brevity and for the blog. First and foremost, compression.
Hmm.
If you've only got 750 words, and a lot of the pieces we publish are only 500, some are fewer, um, every sentence has to do more than one thing.
Hmm.
You can't start up slowly and let the wheels spin on the ice before we get to the good part. Boom, that first sentence has to grab us, not necessarily because of an incendiary topic.
Hmm.
Um, this is violence, fire, sex, whatever. No, grab us because of the language, grab us because of the voice, grab us because of the energy of the sentence. But every sentence should be doing more than one thing. If all your sentence is doing is moving your character across the room, you're not doing what you need to do for Flash. If all your sentence is doing is giving us some backstory, you're not doing what you need to do. Ideally, a sentence moves a character across the room while also revealing something about the character shown in the way she moves, and also includes some language choices or voice or vernacular that makes the teller of the piece scene
Hmm.
specific. So that's compression. That's the other thing is voice. I really love to read work where I go, wow, I really hear a particular person behind the scenes who's writing this. They've got they talk like they talk like they would talk if they were with their relatives in Minnesota. They
Hmm.
haven't cleaned everything up. They have they have figures of speech. They have ways of syntactical ways of forming a sense. I don't mean not looking for mimicry of the Southern dialect or anything, but just a little sense of like this wasn't written. This I mean, years before AI existed. Wouldn't say this wasn't written by AI, but now I can say it. I don't want it to feel like it was written by AI.
Hmm.
I want it to feel like it was written by a living, breathing human being who is herself or himself.
Hmm. Yeah. How do you keep from feeling jaded? I imagine you've seen so many submissions over the years, and they're also short and compressed. I imagine that you've seen like the full range of short nonfiction. So how do you keep it fresh? How can people write something new and exciting for you?
Well, I'll begin by saying I am so lucky to have the assistant editors who, not
Mhm.
all of them, some of them are indeed my age, um, but many of them are younger. Hi, Lindsay. I'm so lucky to have the assistant editors who um, rotate. We've had assistant editors who've been with us for 15, 16 years, but we also have a lot that rotate in there. They come in and stay 2 years, learn something about magazines, learn something about writing, do good work as literary citizens, and then they move on and we get new ones. So it really helps to have all these fresh eyes that aren't, I, I try not to be jaded, but yeah, I've been
Mhm.
at this a long time and I've
Mhm.
seen a lot of short essays. The other way I keep from getting jaded as the final decision maker still
Mhm.
of what goes in the magazine is sort of the excitement of we still publish every issues. One or two people who this is either the first piece they've ever published or it's among the first one or two pieces we've ever published. I mean, we've published Roxane Gay. We've published some really amazing writers that, whose names are Diane Seuss, who's, Pulitzer Prize winner Diane Seuss, whose names are very well known in the literary world. But I really love the fact that we still go out of our way to publish people who I've never heard of, who you've never heard of, who in many cases are just starting to find their place in the literary um,
Mhm.
world, and that keeps me excited. Not to mention, you know, Diane Seuss or Jesse Lee Kercheval or trying to think, Sidney Lee. These writers I've admired for many years. For many years, I was like, boy, I'd like to meet them. They're really exciting, and now they're sending me work. When I accept work from them, they get excited. So I try to focus on that wonderful interaction that happens when I find a piece,
Yeah.
thanks, that really works. And then I can reach out to the writers and say, but we want to publish this. And that's still a joyous experience.
Mhm. So going back to the craft for a second, I always think of flash pieces as needing some kind of turning point. Is that something that you look for in the work, like some moment, some shift, or some element of change? Or would you be hesitant to sort of
I
say that you're looking
sure
for?
would have said yes or in the early days. My
Yeah.
my my writing, my early writing and my training in graduate school in Louisiana was as a short story writer.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a character. The character wants something. The character goes through an experience. There's a shift, and suddenly there's a new state of balance. That still works, but there are pieces that we publish now where really nothing happens except language is explored.
Hmm.
There's pieces we publish which, like poetry, only it's nonfiction and it's presented without line breaks. It's
Hmm.
just a series of beautiful images, one after the other, that
Hmm.
create a whole picture. So no, the formula that you just mentioned, Becky, I'm going to call you Peggy, Becky, um, still works,
Hmm.
though I've learned, been taught by the people who submit work to us, it's certainly not the only way.
Uh-huh. So do you distinguish between
Maybe by the end of the piece,
yeah.
there's an emotional shift in the reader.
Mm,
Maybe by the end of the piece, the reader sees the subject that's being discussed a different way. So that's a
mhm.
shift, but it's not
Right,
that classic American literary short story character shift that
right,
happens. But
right.
I still think is wonderful.
You mentioned prose poetry earlier. Is there, do you get a lot of submissions that are on the cusp, and is that something that you're willing to consider?
Um, when I read prose poetry, it's no different from flash nonfiction. I just
Mm,
have to ask the author. So is this based on truth, or is this just because poems could be totally fantasy? You know,
mhm,
I mean, the language can be the same, the form can be the same, the use of compression can be the same. Flash nonfiction, as does flash fiction, relies very heavily on image,
mm,
sometimes metaphor, sometimes an extended metaphor that goes throughout the entire piece. All of that comes from poetry. All of that is shared between poetry and flash. So take away the line breaks, and suddenly you've got prose poetry and flash. Then you come down to the intent of the author.
mhm.
Um, Goldie, who I don't know, but has a wonderful name, Goldie Peacock, is on my Zoom screen. Hello, Goldie. If she submits a piece that she thinks of as prose poetry, but it's really autobiographical and it's really, she's not making it up.
Mm,
It's very personal. It's very subjective, not objective. It's from Goldie's point of view. It's how Goldie feels about it. Well, then to me, that's flash nonfiction.
mm,
If Goldie were to write a prose poem that they knew was of the imagination, I'm imagining this situation. Well, no, then that's not nonfiction.
mm,
So
mm.
it's really up to the author's intent. And I hope the author reads our guidelines,
Yeah.
enough to realize that's what we're looking for.
Hmm. Hmm. We have a question here we'll get to in a second, but I wanted to sort of zoom in on that word truth that you mentioned, and you brought it up earlier as something that you were going to dive
Yeah.
into a little bit. And I wanted to explore that. Like, do you get submissions where you're wondering about the truth of the piece, and how do you kind of measure the truth? How do you kind of weigh truthfulness in the decision making?
Well, the good news is we don't have to worry about it unless we're going to accept a piece.
Mm.
Uh, there are some pieces I read and I go, really? Really? And I could be wrong, but
Mhm.
that's, I think, really? And then I look at it more closely and say, well, but the sentences really aren't that crisp or energetic. Well, the language use is kind of dull.
Mhm.
Don't feel a vividness and surprise in the moments. So I don't have to worry about it. We'll just send a nice no, thank you. I don't argue with those people.
Mhm.
It very seldom comes up with pieces that we are ready to accept. Um, I think twice in the last 20 years, I've had a awkward conversation with the other. We love this now. There's some people on staff who think it seems a little, can you? And it's in both cases, it was true.
Mhm.
Um, Now, what is truth? We're talking about nonfiction. The literary nonfiction, creative nonfiction is not limited to memoir, but that's certainly the root, the source of most everything we publish as flash nonfiction. Yeah, the memory is lousy.
Mhm.
Science has proven that. We all know that anecdotally. It's just lousy. Um, but readers are also very smart and sophisticated literary readers. They know that. What they want in my mind is what they require is for the author to do their darndest to get it right.
Mhm.
Writing about the past, it's like really, really, really think, is that what happened? Is that how I felt about it? Um, is that an accurate memory? It might be wrong, but at least you've mined your memory and
Mhm.
fact checked your memory and said, am I making that up because it might make a good story, or do I really believe that's what happened?
Mhm.
You have all kinds of leeway within nonfiction to say this next part I don't remember. There's more elegant ways to say this, but
Mhm.
just to illustrate, this next part I'm not so sure of, but I think that was the Thanksgiving that my brother dropped the turkey on the floor. Okay,
Mhm.
so you're acknowledging to the reader that some of these memories are clearer than others. Um, you can step entirely out of memory and assuredness and say, I never really knew where my parents went that afternoon when they left me at home alone and drove off in the car. I've always imagined that they might have gone to, and you could fill in anything you want there. And now you're writing the truth of what you've always imagined. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to use memory and the uncertainty of memory and all of that. There's also the fact that readers understand that we're doing our darndest. They're not naive about how memory works. Um, but when you're lying. Now I'm talking directly to the writers. You know when you're lying. You know when you're making stuff up. If you're lying and making stuff up because it makes for a better story, then you're writing fiction. And that's a wonderful thing to do, but it's a different genre.
Mhm. Sure. Is there room in flash nonfiction to use those qualifiers? Because I hear everything you're saying, and I actually love when writers do that. I think it
Yeah.
brings more of the narrative voice onto the page. Like, if I remember correctly, or this is how I think of it, or I imagine this happening. But if you only have 750 words, do you
Yes.
have the space to do that?
Yes. Yes. Short answer is yes, there is
Okay.
space.
Okay.
It's amazing how much you can get done in 750 words. Um, there's a short way of saying it. Don't don't go on and apologize
Mhm.
about it. Don't, just get in, get out, move on.
Mhm. So do you encounter unreliable narrators? Is that a thing in flash nonfiction?
Well, anything written from the point of view of a child
Mm.
is an unreliable narrator by definition,
Hmm.
as children don't understand the world the way, not that adults are objective and clear either, but children especially don't understand the world. Um, so um, I just noticed
Right.
that my sister, who I won't out her by name, is on in the audience. Hi there. Thank you for dropping by. If I were to write about my sister, who was older than me, she's not anymore. We're the same age now, but when we were younger, she was 7 years older than me. And I'm writing from the point of view of who I was at five, and I see her getting ready to go to the record hop at the Y, I'm describing what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. It's inaccurate. It's unreliable because a 5-year-old can't really make sense of a 7 and 5, a 12-year-old's life.
Mhm.
If I'm writing about my parents, if I'm in that point of view of the child, it's unreliable.
Yeah.
And the fun thing about it, because I'm seeing the world the way with my limited understanding of what is happening. That still happens now, frankly. Um, um, but that's the story for my therapist, not for this Zoom room. That's fun for the reader. That's why unreliable narrators became so popular in fiction.
Right.
For the reader to go, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
David Copperfield doesn't know what's going on, but I'm starting to see what's going on here.
Mhm.
I'm a step ahead of this character. And if it's Dickens or something with a lot of suspense and tension, you're like, oh my God, when's David going to realize that this person he thinks is there to help him isn't there to help him?
Mm.
It doesn't have to be dramatic, intense, and character-based like that in nonfiction. But yeah, there's unreliable, of course, and you're an unreliable narrator if you're writing from a point of view of yourself during an extremely emotionally stressful incident.
Mhm.
We go off the rails a little.
Yeah.
Don't clean all of that up.
Mm.
Then you have sort of a dull, generic piece of writing. Don't write what your therapist would interpret about what actually happened there.
Mm.
Let us hear and feel and smell and sense
Mm.
how it felt to you when
Mhm.
you were 5, how
Mm.
it felt to you when you were 25 and your world was falling apart,
Mm.
how it felt to you when you were 45 and you had this amazing um, epiphany. Try to
Mhm.
capture that in a sense, you're capturing an unreliable point of view.
Mhm. A question is kind of a broader question, but from your vantage point, how has the writer community changed over the years in size or diversity or background or expectations?
I missed the last couple of words. Besides, or
In size or
oh, inside.
diversity, background, expectations.
Um, I think it is definitely, and thank goodness for it. And it's not just the right thing to be more diverse and to have opportunities for more people. It's actually made for a more vibrant and interesting poetry community, fiction community, nonfiction community, flash nonfiction community. If I knew more about theater, I'm sure I'd say theater community. It is so much more diverse in all the ways, uh, race, ethnicity, experience, class, ability, disability, all of these things.
Mm,
That's been a really important change. And of course, it's not just, oh, there's a queer person writing this. Oh, there's a brown person writing this. Oh, there's somebody who grew up poor in the Ozarks writing this. We're getting their experience. We're getting their point of view. And that's what literature does. I can only live one life. I will only know what my life allows me to know in terms of firsthand experience. But I love reading a good book because it's like, oh, wow, this is another life. This is how it
mm,
felt to
mhm,
be Mary Carr. This is how it felt to be
mm,
um, Hanif Abdurraqib. This is how it felt to be, excuse me, it's water. So the diversity is strong and has changed not
mm,
just the faces in the room, but the vibrancy of the writing.
mhm,
Um, I want to say there's more people involved, but I don't know because
mm,
when I first started to think, hey, I want to be a short story writer, I knew one other person in the world who wanted to do that, and he said, don't do that. And then my career has changed, so my viewpoint has changed. Kind of feels like a bigger world. More and more people are writing. People argue that more and more people aren't reading books. There never was a majority of people in the world who read books. Certainly not even in the U.S. So I don't know. I don't know about size,
mm.
but it certainly has changed in terms of energy and diversity of point of view.
Sure. Another question here. Do you make any differentiation between a person telling their own story and telling someone else's story? And the person says they recently saw a submission guideline that said something like, don't submit if this is not your story. And she doesn't know if they were talking about appropriation or maybe point of view. So maybe if you can talk about both of those things. Appropriating, like, do you try to make sure that the work matches the identity? I guess if it's nonfiction, it has to.
It's nonfiction, it has to.
Yeah, yeah,
You can't write nonfiction from the point of view of your grandmother unless you say, here's what I imagine it felt like for my grandmother to
right,
cross the ocean.
right.
Um, Now, we've published pieces, a couple by Brian Doyle. He's passed on, but he was a wonderful writer and is a wonderful writer because his work is still with us. We published pieces where Brian Doyle basically is writing biography.
Mhm,
He met a person, and he was so charmed by this person, and he asked this person a lot of questions because that's who Brian Doyle was, and he writes about that person. I'm a little blanking right now on the title, but Bob, the guy who repairs his shoes. Um, it's 100% Brian Doyle. What excites him about Bob, what he's delighted about by Bob, what he sees about Bob, his interactions with Bob. It's Brian Doyle's story, even though it's a little capsule of Bob's life. Because
mhm,
Brian, if he met somebody interesting, would say, "So tell me about your life," and then he would ask questions for like 20 minutes. He's that kind of a writer,
mhm,
kind of person. So yeah, that's writing about somebody else's life, but it's Brian's story. It's
mhm,
Brian's interaction with this
right.
life.
And it sounds like he makes it explicit that this is not, he's not appropriating it as his own story.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, there's no I.
Right,
There is
right.
an I.
Interesting.
The I is Brian.
Uh-huh.
The story is about Bob, the guy who fixes his shoes.
Right. Are there topics or life events that you get so many submissions about that they have lost their appeal?
No. Um, Having said that, we get so many submissions about losing someone to cancer,
Hmm.
which is heartbreaking, which is devastating in so many different ways. Um, and I've heard other editors say at the AWP, so, don't send us any more of that.
Right.
Well, I reject that advice because we still get pieces that are like about the experience of having cancer, the experience of surviving cancer. We published a few pieces recently by people who, about a year after we published it, they were gone and they knew they were going,
Oh, wow.
they're writing about the final stages and what it feels like. Um, there are still new ways to, or they're writing about their spouse's cancer, their child's
Mhm.
cancer. There are still new ways of writing about it. So I never want to say don't write about cancer. If what you write about cancer is, oh my God, it feels unfair. Where did it come from? I lost my loved one. That wasn't fair. All of that is true. All of that is true to the experience of cancer. Oh my God, where did that come from? Oh my God, why did that have to happen? It's not fair. Oh my God, it went so fast. Oh my God, I miss that person so deeply.
Mhm.
But we know that. We,
Mhm.
as people who live in a society that's been coping with this disease for so long, we know that. What else can you tell us? Can
Mhm.
you tell us something new? Can you help? I've lost two parents to cancer. I've lost friends to cancer. Can you tell me something about having cancer, being the loved one of someone who has cancer, losing someone to cancer in a way that I haven't heard it before, that makes me
Yeah.
think about the world slightly differently for a moment?
Mhm.
The other trope is, I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, the other subject matter that people are always throwing out there is like Alzheimer's, dementia. We get so many pieces about, oh, I'm losing my mom. My mom is drifting away. And I've heard editors go, so don't send us any more of that.
Mhm.
Well, no, that's a really real experience and um, very visceral and very fascinating, even as it is heartbreaking experience, what happens to
Mhm.
someone's um, mind when they're suffering these things. If you tell us, oh my God, it's really sad. They were there and now they're not there anymore. I feel
Mhm.
sad. I'm not trying to be mean, but I mean, if that's all you have to tell us, then no, we know that already. We're sophisticated literary readers. I'm talking about, I don't mean we, the editors. I mean we, the people who read literary magazines. We know that already.
Mhm.
We're sorry, but we kind of know that. Tell us something new.
Mhm.
If you want to read some pieces that make dementia and Alzheimer's and a parent slipping away, and also the delight of the weird language things that
Mhm.
happen, the odd observations that come out of nowhere. You know, Google Rebecca McClanahan. She's got some pieces on brevity,
Yes,
but some
I
pieces.
we read her. I
She's
love
just, I
that.
mean, she's a
Yes,
masterclass.
yes, yes.
Take something that people think they've mined to
Yeah.
the nth degree and make it fresh again.
We read one of her essays in so we have a LitMag reading club where we read a LitMag each month and then we get together and talk about the journal. I forget which magazine, somebody maybe in the chat can refresh my memory, but she had an essay in a LitMag that was about her mother and it was about poetry and it was absolutely stunning.
Just put her name in the chat because
Yeah.
there's two seasons. It's Mick Clanahan.
Uh-huh.
So if you're going
Uh-huh.
to Google it, there's the spelling. It might have been the Kenyan Review. But she's published pieces
Hmm.
of brevity on this subject in
Hmm.
Kenyan Review on this subject and other magazines. She has a
Hmm.
book coming out next year of a collection of them.
Oh, great.
She did, yeah.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
nothing out there that you can't write about and make it
Right.
fresh. But make
Right.
sure you are. Ask yourself, what do readers already know about losing a loved one?
Hmm. Hmm.
And though it's true and devastating, and I'm not making fun of people who think, I want to get this down into words, but if what you're getting down into words is, I was stunned and I went numb when I got the news, that's probably
Hmm.
not enough.
Hmm.
Or if what you're writing is, I was really sad when this
Yeah.
person died. Um, it's true, and I feel for you, and I've been there, but it's probably not enough to make a reader go, wow, whew, I just had an experience and learned something new about life,
Hmm.
which is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Poetry, fiction, nonfiction, give the reader experience and make them feel like they've, for a moment, learned something new about life
Hmm.
or thought about. It doesn't not learned. It's not like you're giving them a fact,
Right.
opinion, made them think a little differently about life.
Hmm. What are you seeing a lot of subject matter wise in submissions? I always think it's so interesting because I think editors sort of have their pulse on what people are writing about nowadays, what people are submitting. So I know there are a lot of dementia Alzheimer's pieces because we I encounter them all the time in LitMags. What else are you? What sort of like cultural trends or is there nothing? Is it just sort of like a
Um,
hobby?
we're certainly seeing a lot more pieces about uh, the spectrum of gender,
Hmm.
gender fluidity.
Hmm.
Um, we're seeing a lot and then sophisticated pieces because it's not like I'm gay, I'm not gay,
Hmm.
trans, I'm not trans. It's a, there's a and I don't I'm old. Look at me. I don't understand it entirely myself, but I know that there's a lot of energy and a lot of differentiation, and there's really fascinating reasons behind why this is happening in our society.
Hmm.
It's such a strong movement right now. Seeing a lot of pieces that illuminate that. We're seeing a lot of political pieces because of the last, two elections, last three elections. People who are a little angry about politics. That I'm not saying you can't write about that for brevity, but we're not a political opinion magazine. So
Hmm.
most of those pieces we say no, thank you. Um, well, I mean, the what used to be called a nature piece, which was simply an appreciation of nature, has certainly taken on a new energy and a slightly different lens because of global climate change. So there's a kind of a new category of nature piece, which is
Hmm.
um, trying to understand our relationship to nature in small ways that might reflect on the bigger issues. That's a trend I'm seeing a lot of,
Hmm.
and that's as far as I can go right now. I'm sure if
Sure.
I'll call everybody late in about an hour or two and tell you I thought of another one. For
So
your phone
going
number.
back to the political pieces, will you reject a piece outright if it touches on politics? I'm guessing not, but if it feels more like a kind of
Yeah,
rant.
now I believe that people can argue with me about this.
Mhm.
I on the Brevity blog, which comes out every day, it's much more current. You can write about something on a Tuesday, and it might be published 2 weeks later. Whereas Brevity, the magazine, has a 3 to 6 month or more lag time before a piece is published. Social media is full of angst and concern about I'll just stick with the last election, though it's been going on for a while, for the last couple of elections. The social media is so full of that. Regular media is so full of that. The news media is so full of that. Television is so full of that. Um, Entertainment Tonight is so full of that. I, I I've made a decision to, politics is a funny word. Everything is politics.
Mhm.
We're talking about race, gender, class, healthcare. We're talking about politics on some level. But I try not to. I like to think of Brevity and Brevity blog as a place where a reader can go for some respite.
Mhm.
I'm going to Brevity because I want to read deep pieces about the human experience. I'm not going there to hear something more about these people that are in politics that are driving me insane. The Brevity blog, which probably I don't think I've said this yet, it publishes writing life, and I did say it, writing life, publishing, editing. Uh, what is it like to be a writer? What does a writer need to know and learn? How do you get your work edited? How
Mhm.
do you get your work published? I think it was a place that you can get some respite from
Mhm.
what you're finding in all the other media. So yes, I do shy away from it.
Mhm.
Am I hiding my head in the sand? Well, maybe. It's a choice I've made, and I'm good with it.
Sure. I think we appreciate some respite here and there.
Yeah, it's not like you can't get it elsewhere.
Right, right. So what would you say are some common pitfalls. If you could tell writers like this is a reason why it's just not making the cut. It's I'm sure you mentioned you have to reject a lot of good work. So what might be a reason why the piece just doesn't go over the finish line?
Clear and simple. I've written something I'm really excited about. This is my second draft. Man, I love it. I'm
Mm,
sending it off to a magazine.
mm,
Um, the second draft is barely a start. Uh,
mm,
I personally will do 4 or 5 or 7 drafts of a piece, long or short, before I even realize what the heart of the piece is.
mm-hmm,
And at draft 7, when I realize, oh, here's what the piece is really about. I thought it was about that, but it's really about this. Then I dig in and say, okay, so now how do I reveal that?
mm-hmm,
And then once I've got what I think is the shape of a piece emotionally, then I go in again, like sentence by sentence. The hard's like, does this sentence have any extra words in it? Is this sentence repeating something that I say 4 sentences earlier? Am I saying the same thing 3 times in a row? Because we all do that. Kind of trying out, how do I get this point across to the reader? Um, the biggest reason pieces get the what I hope is a polite and lovely no thank you from Brevity is the writer hasn't spent enough time. They've
mm-hmm,
got it. It feels really real to them, but of course it does. It came right out of your gut.
mm-hmm,
Now how do you make it feel really real and vibrant and fresh to a reader? And that's the hard work of figuring out what you're writing about. And then it's the hard, although I enjoy it, and then it's the hard work of like, I'm going to polish these sentences. I'm going to make this really shine.
mm-hmm,
Each and every, it's only 30 sentences, maybe if it's a flash piece. I'm going to spend, some time on each one of those sentences, especially looking for anything that's slowing things down or repeating information.
mm-hmm.
Emotional
And
doesn't mean information like the color of her dress. I mean,
mm,
emotional information, spiritual information,
mm,
the whole river of the piece.
yeah. If a writer has received one of those very nice no thank you, should they keep trying?
Oh yeah. Oh
Mhm.
yeah. One of the nice things we do, and I can say nice because I get a lot of emails back about it, is if you get a nice, if you get a no thank you from us, doesn't matter if it's a no thank you or you came close, no thank you, or wow, you came really close, no thank you, whatever level. We send a link to a list of about 75 other magazines.
Oh, wow.
They're looking
Very
for
nice.
flash nonfiction.
Mhm.
Yeah, please keep sending your work to Brevity, but there are other magazines too. So try, I mean, don't just shatterscot it.
Oh,
Get,
Kathleen, can you please make sure you're muted? Kathleen?
Kathleen?
Um, oh gosh. Kathleen Whittle. She's not here.
Hello, Kathleen. Okay, I'll just
Uh,
talk loud.
all right. I don't, sorry, I'm trying
Can you
to
mute
hit
her on
the,
your end, Becky? Sometimes the
yeah, I'm trying to do that. Okay. All right. Dinty, I know you have a hard stop at in just a few minutes, so I just want to ask
what
you a
question was I
couple
about
more.
to answer? I forget what, I don't remember what it was. Oh, 75 other magazines
Yes.
that publish flash nonfiction. Don't scattershot, if that's the term I'm looking for, all of them, but read 3 or 4 of them. There's links.
Mhm.
And if you read 3 or 4 of them, maybe you'll like one of them. If you
Mhm.
see a piece in Brevity or elsewhere that you like, look at where else that writer has published and send your flash there.
Mhm. That's great. That's very nice that you do that. So just a few more questions. You mentioned that you have volunteers, assistant readers. Is that something people can apply for? Are there ever opportunities to work behind the scenes at Brevity?
Yes, we tend to bring new people on board in September. So right now we have a full crew of brilliant assistant editors. So we would ask you to be in touch in over the summer. Ideally, wait until August. Um, that's the magazine itself. We're always looking for writers for the Brevity blog. Go up on the blog 2 or 3 um, blog entries ago, just right like January 5th or something. We published an article about the sort of subject matter we're looking for on the blog. So please, I'm sorry, I'm doing something in the chat and talking to them. Please, if you want to get involved, send us something at the blog.
Great. And are there any plans, question here, to do another anthology?
Not right now. I mean, that took us 20 years to get to that one. So it's only been about 5 years. If we're
Mhm.
around that long, yeah, but we'll see.
Yeah. So this has been great. Thank you so much, Dinty. Thank you everyone for coming out. I have one final question for you, and this is a question that I ask all editors. You mentioned that you're very busy, you have a day job, your own writing, family, and you like sleep for some strange reason. So what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going? What keeps you from burnout? What excites you and inspires you to keep working on this magazine?
Um, Giving back,
Hmm.
part of it. It's like there were a bunch of editors who, when they had no good reason to want to publish my work, they did.
Yeah.
Um, so I like the idea that I'm giving. I'm sorry, I'm talking and trying to put something in the chat. That's not a very good idea. It's not working. Okay, I'll give up on that. I'm doing a craft. I'm
If
doing a
there's something, you could always share something with me and I'll share it.
okay, I'm doing a craft talk a week from now.
Okay.
Trying to build up some audience, but I can't get it to work in the chat.
Okay.
It's on detail and description in
Oh, nice.
flash fiction and nonfiction. You just asked me a final question. Why do I do it? I
Final
love
question. Why do you do it? What keeps you?
when I was a writer that nobody had any reason to care about or hear about. Editors would take time and look at my work and give me
Mhm.
a step up on the first rung of the ladder. I love when we do that at Brevity. I love reading the work that we get at Brevity. It
Mhm.
just amazes me and all the time. And I love the fact that we're creating a community of writers.
Mhm.
There's I said Brevity's been around for 27 years. There have been people who've been sending us work for 26 of those 27 years and reading it for 26 of those 27 years. It's a real gift to have that community.
Yeah. Yeah, sure is. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been really great and good luck with the magazine. Have fun with it. And thank you everybody for coming out today.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.